This is Alex Mercer, and today we're returning to the moment when the world stopped behaving the way it always had. The day the ground didn't stop moving. At first, it felt familiar enough to dismiss. A low vibration passed through the floor, subtle but noticeable, the kind that makes people pause and look around without panic. Many had felt earthquakes before. They waited for it to fade, but instead of fading, it deepened. The vibration became motion, and the motion became violence. In those first few seconds, reality cracked, not visually, but psychologically. The idea that the ground was solid, dependable, permanent, dissolved in real time. The shaking intensified without warning or rhythm. There was no single jolt, no sharp beginning and end. It was continuous, relentless, as if the planet itself had forgotten how to stop. Buildings swayed not briefly, but endlessly, bending far beyond what the eye believed was possible. People tried to stand and were thrown sideways. Others dropped instantly, instinct overriding thought. Streets rippled, sidewalks split. The sound was overwhelming, a deep grinding roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't just heard, it was felt inside the chest, inside the bones. Time began to lose its structure. Seconds stretched unnaturally. The body's internal clock shut down under stress, replaced by pure instinct. There was no sense of how long anymore, only the terrifying awareness that it was still happening. Thoughts became fragmented. Hold on. Stay down. Don't move. Don't let go. People later struggled to describe the duration, because duration itself ceased to exist. The quake didn't feel long or short. It felt endless. As the ground continued to move, the environment transformed violently. Roads cracked open like dry earth. Power lines snapped and sparked, collapsing into streets already buckling under strain. Vehicles rocked uncontrollably, slamming into one another without engines running. Glass exploded outward from buildings, raining down in shimmering sheets. Dust filled the air, thick enough to sting the eyes and choke the breath. Visibility dropped rapidly, turning daylight into a brown-gray haze where direction and distance no longer made sense. Fear evolved into something deeper. Panic requires the belief that escape is possible. As the shaking refused to stop, that belief began to erode. Screams faded, not because people were calm, but because breathing itself became difficult. Muscles locked from tension, hands clenched until they hurt. The mind stopped asking, when will this end, and began asking, what if it doesn't? That thought, once formed, could not be undone. Then came the first 60 seconds, the minute that would later be remembered as the point of no return. In that first minute, the modern world began failing systematically. Buildings designed to sway reached their limits almost immediately. Structural joints groaned and snapped. Facades peeled away. Interior walls collapsed. Stairwells warped. Elevators froze between floors, trapping people in metal boxes as everything around them shifted. Homes turned into hazards. Offices became mazes of falling debris. Within seconds, power flickered across entire regions. Lights blinked once, twice, and then vanished. Transformers blew under strain. Electrical grids collapsed in cascading failure. Entire cities were plunged into darkness without warning. The absence of light amplified the terror. Without visual reference points, movement became even more disorienting. People reached for walls that were no longer where memory said they should be. Darkness and motion merged into something primal, something the human brain was never meant to navigate. Communication failed almost instantly. Cell towers swayed, then went silent. Phone signals dropped without explanation. Internet connections vanished mid-update. Emergency alerts never arrived because the systems designed to send them were already offline. Phones became useless slabs of glass, clutched tightly in shaking hands. For the first time in decades, millions were completely disconnected, not just socially, but informationally. No guidance, no reassurance, no way to know how widespread the destruction truly was. Panic spread faster than the seismic waves themselves, not through crowds, but through realization. The realization that everything people relied on every day, electricity, communication, infrastructure, could disappear at once. That understanding hit harder than the physical shaking. It became clear that this was not a small or isolated event. This was massive, regional, possibly continental. The ground was still moving, and already the world felt unrecognizable. By the end of that first minute, if it can even be called an end, nothing felt stable anymore. Streets were altered beyond recognition. Familiar landmarks were damaged or erased. Orientation vanished. Dust hung in the air, mixing with the smell of ruptured gas lines and burning systems. And still, the earth continued to move beneath everything, refusing to offer closure or relief. That first 60 seconds changed everything, not just because of what was destroyed, but because of what was revealed. It exposed how fragile permanence truly is, how thin the line is between order and chaos, how quickly the ground beneath civilization, both literal and psychological, can give way. From that moment on, the world would never be experienced the same way again. The shaking did not stop, and neither did the consequences. When the shaking finally begins to weaken, the world that emerges no longer resembles the one that existed before. Cities do not simply suffer damage. They lose their shape, their logic, their identity. Skyscrapers that once stood as symbols of precision and control now lean at impossible angles. Their glass skins shattered, their steel frames exposed like broken bones. Some buildings sink unevenly into the ground, swallowed partially by liquefied earth, while others shear apart floor by floor, collapsing in slow, grinding motions that feel unreal to witness. Streets no longer run straight. They curve, dip, and split, transforming familiar routes into distorted pathways that defy memory. Bridges, once engineered to connect and support, twist under forces they were never designed to endure. Some sag into rivers below, fractured at their weakest points. Others remain standing, but warped, their surfaces cracked and uneven, no longer safe, no longer trustworthy. Roads buckle upward or collapse inward, creating sudden chasms where traffic once flowed. Rail lines bend like wire. Underground systems flood or cave in, erasing entire layers of the city that once hummed invisibly beneath daily life. Navigation becomes guesswork. Orientation disappears. The mental maps people relied on for years become useless in a matter of minutes. Entire neighborhoods appear to have shifted sideways. Buildings that once aligned neatly now sit at odd angles to one another, separated by fresh fissures in the earth. Familiar skylines are broken, incomplete, missing pieces that once defined them. In some places, the damage feels surgical. One structure destroyed while another nearby remains standing, as if chosen at random. In others, devastation stretches block after block, creating wide scars of rubble and dust. The city stops feeling like a designed environment and starts feeling like a geological event, raw, chaotic, and indifferent. The psychological impact of this reshaping is immediate and profound. People struggle to recognize where they are, even when standing in places they've known their entire lives. Landmarks that once provided comfort and direction are gone or altered beyond recognition. Without those visual anchors, the sense of disorientation deepens. It's not just the city that has lost its shape. It's people's understanding of where they fit within it. The environment no longer feels human-scaled or human-controlled. It feels hostile, unpredictable, alive in the wrong way. Then, gradually, something even more unsettling arrives. The motion fades, the roaring subsides, and in its place comes silence. The silence after the shaking is not peaceful. It is heavy, unnatural, and disorienting. After minutes of relentless noise, grinding concrete, shattering glass, screaming metal, the absence of sound feels almost violent. Ears ring. The body remains tense, waiting for movement that no longer comes. Dust hangs thick in the air, muting colors and softening edges, giving the world a dreamlike quality that feels wrong. Breathing is shallow, cautious, as if loud inhales might somehow restart the chaos. People stand frozen where they ended up, on streets, in doorways, under collapsed structures, unsure whether it's safe to move. Some don't realize the shaking has stopped right away. Their bodies continue to sway instinctively, bracing for impact that doesn't arrive. Others begin to move too quickly, driven by adrenaline, only to stop again as aftershocks ripple faintly beneath their feet, reminding everyone that the ground's silence cannot yet be trusted. The air is filled with fine debris. Every step stirs clouds of dust that sting the eyes and coat the throat. Sunlight, if it's daytime, filters through the haze in pale beams, illuminating scenes that feel staged rather than real. Sounds return slowly and unevenly. Distant alarms, collapsing debris settling into place, fragments of shouting carried on the air. But these sounds feel small compared to what came before, swallowed by the vastness of the destruction. Survivors move carefully, as if the city might break again if handled too roughly. Conversations are fragmented. Questions trail off unanswered. People look at one another searching for cues. Is it over? Is it safe? What do we do now? There are no clear answers. Phones are checked instinctively, only to confirm what's already known. No signal, no guidance, no outside voice explaining what just happened. The silence amplifies disbelief. The mind struggles to reconcile how quickly everything changed. Minutes ago, this was a functioning city. Now it is a field of rubble and warped steel. The brain tries to treat it like a bad dream, something that will reset once focus returns. But nothing resets. The damage is solid, permanent, undeniable. The stillness forces people to confront the scale of what has occurred without distraction. In this quiet, the first waves of realization begin to hit. This is not just damage. It is loss. Loss of homes, of workplaces, of routines, of certainty. Some begin calling out names, their voices tentative at first, then more urgent as the lack of response stretches on. Others sit down where they stand, overwhelmed by the sudden emotional weight now that the immediate danger has paused. Tears come late, delayed by shock. Some don't come at all, replaced instead by numbness. Emergency sirens eventually rise in the distance, but they feel far away, insufficient for what's visible. The scale of the destruction makes response feel impossibly small. Roads are blocked. Access routes are gone. Help, when it comes, will come slowly. The silence makes that clear. This is the gap between disaster and response. The moment when the world is forced to sit with what has happened before, understanding what comes next. The city, once loud and alive, now feels hollow. Every sound echoes too much. Every movement feels cautious. The familiar rhythm of urban life, traffic, conversation, background noise, has been erased, replaced by a stillness that presses inward. It is in this silence that the true magnitude of the earthquake begins to settle into collective consciousness. Not as numbers or headlines, but as lived reality. When cities lose their shape and silence follows the shaking, something deeper breaks alongside the structures. The assumption that tomorrow will resemble today. The belief that the ground beneath us is stable. In that quiet, dust-filled moment, before assessments and rescue and rebuilding begin, the world pauses in shared disbelief, staring at the ruins of familiarity, knowing that nothing will ever look quite the same again. When the ground settles enough for systems to attempt recovery, another kind of collapse becomes painfully clear. Power grids fail almost immediately, not as a single blackout, but as a cascading disappearance of light across entire regions. One moment, emergency lighting flickers in buildings that somehow remained standing. The next, it's gone. Streets fall into darkness. Skylines vanish. The familiar glow that once defined nighttime cities is replaced by a deep, unsettling black. This isn't just the loss of electricity. It's the sudden loss of orientation, safety, and connection. Substations rupture under stress they were never designed to endure. Transmission lines snap or short-circuit as towers bend and fall. Automated safety systems shut down entire networks to prevent fires and further damage, but the effect is immediate and total. Elevators freeze mid-shaft. Traffic signals go dark. Hospitals switch to emergency generators, their hum becoming one of the few signs of life in an otherwise silent city. Even those generators feel fragile, temporary, as fuel supplies and maintenance become uncertain within hours. Water systems fail next. Pumps stop working without power. Pressure drops. Faucets run dry or sputter with air and sediment. In some areas, pipes rupture underground, flooding streets that are already cracked and uneven. In others, there is nothing. No water for drinking, sanitation, or firefighting. Fire becomes a terrifying possibility as gas lines rupture and sparks ignite debris in the darkness. Without electricity, without water, modern life unravels faster than most people ever imagined possible. Communication follows the same path. Cell towers, already damaged by the quake, lose backup power one by one. Signals fade. Internet access disappears entirely. Radios become the only source of information for some. But even broadcasts are inconsistent as stations struggle with damaged infrastructure. The silence deepens. Not just physical silence, but informational silence. People don't know what's happening beyond what they can see with their own eyes. Rumors spread faster than facts. Fear fills the gaps where clarity should be. Darkness changes behavior instantly. People stop moving freely. Streets that once felt familiar become threatening voids. Without streetlights, debris becomes invisible until it's underfoot. Open fissures, fallen wires, unstable structures hide in shadow. Every step feels risky. Flashlights and phone screens become precious, guarded carefully as batteries drain and recharging is no longer an option. Nightfall, once routine, becomes something to dread. As darkness takes over, emergency systems attempt to respond and immediately begin to fail under the sheer scale of need. Emergency call centers are overwhelmed within minutes. Lines ring endlessly. Many calls never connect at all. Dispatchers working with partial information and failing systems are forced to make impossible decisions about where to send help first. There is no longer a question of efficiency, only of triage on a massive, unthinkable scale. Fire stations suffer damage. Some collapse partially. Others are inaccessible due to ruptured roads or debris-choked streets. Ambulances attempt to navigate routes that no longer exist, detouring constantly, sometimes forced to abandon vehicles entirely. Police stations face similar challenges, struggling to coordinate without reliable communication or clear command structures. The systems designed to handle emergencies were built for isolated incidents, not for a citywide, region-spanning catastrophe unfolding all at once. First responders are stretched beyond physical and emotional limits almost immediately. Crews work without rest, without full information, without certainty that backup is coming. They encounter scenes of destruction that defy training manuals. Entire buildings collapsed, people trapped in spaces that can't be reached without heavy equipment that is delayed or unavailable. Every rescue attempt becomes a calculation of risk, time, and dwindling resources. Some calls are marked unreachable, others are never logged at all. Hospitals, already strained, become focal points of desperation. With power unreliable and staff unable to reach work due to destroyed transportation networks, medical care turns into controlled chaos. Hallways fill, supplies run low. Decisions that should never be routine become constant. Outside, people wait in darkness, hoping their injuries are not the kind that can't afford delay. The gap between need and capacity grows wider with every passing hour. The failure of emergency systems doesn't mean responders stop trying. It means they are forced to operate in a reality where help cannot reach everyone. This realization spreads quickly among the population. People begin helping each other not out of heroism, but necessity. Strangers form small groups, sharing light, water, and information. Communities improvise checkpoints, shelters, and search efforts because there is no alternative. The disaster becomes personal, local, immediate. As night deepens, the absence of organized response feels heavier than the darkness itself. Sirens, when heard, feel distant and rare. Each one raises hope, and then disappointment when it passes by without stopping. The understanding settles in quietly but firmly. Rescue will take time. Recovery will take far longer. For now, survival depends not on systems, but on endurance. In the wake of a mega earthquake, the failure of power grids and emergency systems reveals a truth that is difficult to confront. Modern civilization functions on a delicate balance, one that can unravel in minutes when the ground itself rebels. Darkness doesn't just remove light. It strips away the illusion of control. And when emergency systems are overwhelmed instantly, the disaster stops feeling temporary and starts feeling transformational, forcing everyone to face a world where resilience is no longer optional and help is no longer guaranteed. Beneath the shattered surface of the city, another world exists, one defined by darkness, pressure, and time slipping away. When buildings collapse, they do not fall cleanly. They fold, compress, and trap spaces inside themselves, creating pockets where people remain alive but buried. These survivors find themselves suspended in a terrifying in-between state, not rescued, not gone, but waiting. Air becomes precious. Every breath is measured without conscious thought. Dust coats mouths and lungs, making each inhale burn. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the occasional glow of a phone screen that must be rationed like food or water. Sound becomes the only connection to the outside world. People knock, tap, scrape, anything to create rhythm, anything to be heard. Some shout until their voices fail, then switch to tapping metal against concrete, praying someone above recognizes the pattern as human. Silence stretches endlessly between attempts. In that silence, the mind wanders to terrifying places. Thoughts spiral. How long has it been? Is anyone coming? Will the air last? Hope becomes something fragile, rebuilt again and again after every imagined footstep that turns out to be nothing more than debris settling. Bodies remain pinned in painful positions. Limbs go numb. Blood circulation slows. Panic must be controlled because panic wastes oxygen. Survivors talk to themselves, count breaths, replay memories just to stay conscious. Some are trapped with strangers, forming bonds in the dark through whispered reassurance. Others are alone, and loneliness becomes as dangerous as the physical injuries. The city above continues to shift, sending tremors through the rubble that feel like aftershocks, reminding those trapped that even their fragile shelter could collapse further at any moment. Time loses meaning underground. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel infinite. Rescue efforts, though relentless, move slowly against mountains of concrete and steel. Heavy machinery cannot always reach the deepest voids. Sometimes rescuers must stop entirely to listen. Absolute silence required to detect the faintest human sound. Every pause is agonizing for those buried, who don't know whether silence means listening or abandonment. Above ground, hospitals descend into crisis mode almost immediately, becoming battlegrounds of endurance rather than places of calm healing. Medical facilities that survived structural damage are flooded with patients faster than they can be processed. Stretchers line hallways. Waiting rooms turn into treatment areas. Parking lots become triage zones. The injured arrive covered in dust and blood, some walking, some carried, some unconscious. Doctors and nurses move continuously, barely stopping long enough to drink water or acknowledge exhaustion. Power failures force hospitals to rely on emergency generators, which hum constantly, threatening to fail at any moment. Lights flicker. Some operating rooms are illuminated only by backup lamps or handheld lights. Surgeries are performed under conditions that resemble disaster drills. But this is no drill, and it doesn't end after an hour. Supplies are rationed carefully. Painkillers, antibiotics, blood units, surgical tools, everything becomes finite. Medical staff are forced to prioritize in ways that haunt them long after the decisions are made. Communication inside hospitals breaks down as well. Staff members rely on runners instead of phones. Information about incoming patients is incomplete or delayed. Family members search desperately for loved ones, moving from ward to ward, often receiving no answers at all. The emotional weight inside these facilities becomes overwhelming. Hope and grief exist side by side, separated sometimes by nothing more than a thin curtain. Doctors work beyond human limits. Nurses steady shaking hands while hiding their own fear. Some staff members don't know whether their own families survived, yet they continue treating strangers because stopping is not an option. Every successful procedure feels like a small victory against chaos. Every loss feels deeply personal. Sleep becomes impossible. Adrenaline replaces rest, but only temporarily. As hours turn into days, hospitals begin to feel like sealed worlds of their own, cut off from the outside, operating on pure necessity. Ethical lines blur. Comfort becomes secondary to survival. Humanity is tested not by lack of skill, but by the weight of impossible choices. The question is no longer, can we save everyone, but who can we save right now? Together, beneath the city and within its overwhelmed hospitals, the same struggle unfolds, a race against time. For those trapped under rubble, every sound above could mean life. For those inside medical facilities, every decision carries consequences that will echo long after the ground stops shaking. The earthquake doesn't end when the motion stops. It continues in the darkness below and the fluorescent-lit corridors above, where survival depends on patience, resilience, and the fragile persistence of hope in the face of unimaginable pressure. Even after the main quake releases its grip, the terror does not loosen. Aftershocks begin almost immediately, smaller in magnitude, but devastating in their psychological impact. Each tremor feels like a warning, a reminder that the earth is still unstable, still capable of violence. Survivors learn quickly that rest is dangerous. Sleep becomes fragmented, shallow, and rare. Every vibration, whether it's an aftershock, a passing vehicle, or even the wind, triggers a surge of fear. Bodies remain tense, muscles locked, minds constantly bracing for impact. The unpredictability of aftershocks is what makes them unbearable. They arrive without pattern or mercy, minutes apart, hours apart, sometimes days apart, long enough for people to start believing it might finally be over, only to be thrown back into panic. Tents, shelters, and damaged buildings sway again. Cracks widen. Structures that survived the initial quake finally give in. Each aftershock feels like the earth testing its own damage, deciding what to finish breaking. Psychologically, the damage deepens with every tremor. Survivors begin to flinch instinctively, ducking, covering their heads, scanning their surroundings for escape routes, even when none exist. Children cling to adults. Adults hide fear behind forced calm. The sound of rumbling, no matter how faint, causes hearts to race. The mind cannot relax when the ground itself refuses to stay still. This constant state of alert exhausts people faster than physical labor ever could. Night makes it worse. Darkness amplifies uncertainty. Aftershocks in the night feel more violent, more personal. With limited lighting and unstable shelter, many choose to stay outside, even in cold or rain, afraid to be indoors when the next shock hits. Sleep deprivation spreads, judgment weakens, emotional resilience erodes. People are no longer just surviving damage, they are surviving anticipation. Just as communities struggle to endure this unrelenting tension, another threat emerges from beyond the broken land. Far from the epicenter, beneath the ocean floor, the same tectonic violence has displaced massive volumes of water. The sea responds slowly at first, almost invisibly. Then the warning signs appear. Sirens, alerts, sudden evacuations ordered through damaged communication systems. For coastal regions already crippled by shaking, there is barely time to react. The ocean pulls back unnaturally, exposing seabeds never meant to be seen. To some it looks calm, to others, ominous. Then the wave arrives, not as a single wall of water, but as a series of surges, each one pushing farther inland than the last. The tsunami does not roar like an explosion. It advances with unstoppable force, swallowing streets, ports, and entire neighborhoods already weakened by the quake. Buildings that withstood shaking are no match for water. Foundations erode instantly. Debris becomes weapons, smashing through anything in its path. Cars float, collide, and overturn. People run, but water moves faster. Evacuation routes are blocked by earthquake damage, turning escape into a maze of impossible choices. Sirens wail until power fails. Then there is only the sound of rushing water and breaking structures. For coastal hospitals, emergency centers, and shelters, the tsunami is catastrophic. Flooding destroys remaining equipment. Supplies are lost. Patients are forced to move again, often without transport or protection. Survivors who escaped the earthquake find themselves fighting a second disaster they never expected to face. The sense of betrayal by the natural world deepens. The ground shook. Now the sea has turned against them. When the water finally recedes, it leaves behind devastation layered on top of devastation. Salt water contaminates freshwater sources. Mud, wreckage, and silence cover entire coastlines. The psychological toll becomes overwhelming. Survivors are no longer asking when things will return to normal. They are asking what normal even means anymore. Aftershocks continue. The sea remains unpredictable. The earth feels hostile, unstable, untrustworthy. This is no longer a single event. It is a sustained assault on both land and mind. The earthquake does not end with the shaking, nor does the tsunami end with the retreating waves. Together, they leave behind a reality where fear is constant, rest feels impossible, and survival becomes an ongoing negotiation with a planet that has made it painfully clear. The worst can always return. When the physical damage begins to settle into something visible and measurable, a quieter but equally devastating collapse unfolds behind the scenes. Supply chains, systems designed for efficiency, not resilience, begin to fail almost immediately. Roads are fractured, bridges are down, ports are damaged, rail lines are twisted beyond use. What once moved invisibly and reliably in the background of daily life now grinds to a halt. Food trucks don't arrive. Fuel deliveries stop. Pharmacies run out of essential medicine faster than anyone anticipated. Shelves empty not because of panic alone, but because replenishment is no longer possible. Warehouses sit full but unreachable, cut off by impassable routes. Distribution centers lose power or structural integrity. Fuel shortages compound everything. Without diesel, generators fall silent. Emergency vehicles slow. Refrigeration fails. Perishable food spoils within days. Grocery stores close or ration aggressively. Long lines form early, then disappear entirely when there is nothing left to sell. What remains is uncertainty, not knowing when the next meal will come, or if it will come at all. Medicine becomes one of the most frightening shortages. Insulin, antibiotics, heart medication, items people rely on daily, vanish first. Hospitals attempt to stretch supplies, prioritizing critical cases, improvising when standard treatments are unavailable. Pharmacies lock doors after being stripped bare. People begin sharing, trading, rationing what little they have left. A missed dose turns from inconvenience into danger. Chronic conditions become life-threatening not because of injury, but because the system that supported survival no longer exists. Fuel scarcity reshapes entire regions. Without gasoline, evacuation becomes impossible. Aid cannot move efficiently. Communities become isolated pockets, dependent on whatever resources remain within reach. Rural areas feel abandoned. Urban centers feel suffocated. The modern promise of constant availability collapses in days, revealing how thin the margin really was. People begin to understand that civilization is not just buildings and technology, it is movement. And when movement stops, everything changes. As the physical shortages deepen, an invisible struggle intensifies within survivors themselves. The psychological impact of living on unstable ground does not fade with time. It sharpens. Even when the earth is still, the body remembers motion. People experience vertigo while standing still. Floors feel like they're swaying. The sensation of falling arrives without warning. Brains misfire, convinced the ground is moving again, even when it isn't. Anxiety becomes constant. Survivors scan walls for cracks, listen for distant rumbles, sleep lightly or not at all. Chairs feel unsafe. Beds feel unsafe. Indoors feels dangerous. Outdoors feels exposed. There is no place where the body fully relaxes. Aftershocks may lessen, but fear does not. The mind replays the initial quake endlessly, trying to prepare for a repeat that may or may not come. Many struggle with dissociation, a sense that the world isn't quite real anymore. Familiar environments feel artificial, like sets that could collapse at any moment. Some people feel disconnected from their own bodies, as if watching events from a distance. Others experience sudden waves of panic triggered by harmless stimuli. A passing truck, a slamming door, a low-frequency sound. The ground no longer feels like a foundation. It feels like a threat. Trauma reshapes behavior. People avoid tall buildings. They refuse to enter enclosed spaces. They sleep near exits. They cling to loved ones. Children ask questions adults can't answer. Adults carry guilt for surviving when others didn't. Grief arrives late, layered beneath shock and survival instincts. There is no clear timeline for healing when the source of fear, the earth itself, cannot be escaped. Over time, survivors begin to realize that recovery is not just about rebuilding structures or restoring supplies. It is about learning to trust again. Trust the ground. Trust routine. Trust that stillness will remain still. This trust does not return quickly. For many, it never fully does. The earthquake leaves a permanent shift in perception, a quiet understanding that stability is temporary and certainty is fragile. When supply chains collapse overnight and the psychological ground never fully settles, the disaster extends far beyond the initial event. It becomes a transformation of systems, of behavior, of belief. The earthquake does not just break cities, it breaks assumptions. And in the aftermath, survival depends not only on food and fuel, but on the slow, difficult process of learning how to live in a world that has proven it can move without warning. When governments finally declare a national emergency, it is not a dramatic gesture. It is an admission. An admission that the situation has exceeded every existing plan, every localized response, every assumption about containment. The announcement often comes hours or days after the quake, not because leaders were unaware, but because the full scope took time to understand. Damage reports conflicted. Communication was fragmented. Entire regions went silent. When the address finally reaches the public, the tone is different from routine disaster briefings. Voices are slower. Words are chosen carefully. There is no attempt to soften reality anymore. The declaration confirms what people already feel in their bodies and see in their surroundings. This is not temporary disruption. This is national-scale collapse. Borders may close. Military units are mobilized not for conflict, but for logistics, rescue, and control. Emergency powers are invoked to reroute resources, suspend regulations, and enforce curfews. Leaders speak of unity, resilience, and sacrifice. But beneath those words is an unmistakable message. Life will not return to normal anytime soon. For many, this moment lands heavier than the earthquake itself. The shaking was chaos. This announcement is clarity. It removes denial. It tells survivors that the systems they depended on are no longer sufficient, and that extraordinary measures are now necessary just to stabilize what remains. Some feel relief that authority has finally acknowledged the scale. Others feel fear, knowing that national emergencies mean restrictions, rationing, and difficult decisions that will affect daily life in ways that cannot yet be predicted. As the speech ends, silence follows, not because there is nothing to say, but because people are absorbing the permanence of what they've heard. Phones light up with messages. Radios repeat the announcement on a loop. In shelters, in damaged homes, in cars parked where roads ended, people look at one another with the same unspoken question. What does this mean for us now? The answer is never simple. A national emergency does not end danger. It formalizes it. In the days and weeks that follow, the consequences become visible on the landscape itself. Some cities do not recover. Engineers assess damage and reach conclusions that feel unthinkable. Entire districts are unsafe, not temporarily, but indefinitely. Foundations are compromised. Fault lines have shifted. Flooding risks are permanent. Infrastructure is too damaged to justify rebuilding. These areas are marked, restricted, and eventually abandoned. People leave reluctantly at first, packing what little they can carry. Some expect to return in weeks. Others know, even if they don't say it out loud, that they are leaving forever. Streets empty. Windows remain broken. Signs fade. Nature begins reclaiming spaces almost immediately. Plants pushing through cracks, dust settling undisturbed, silence replacing traffic. The cities don't collapse all at once. They hollow out slowly, one family, one block at a time. These abandoned areas become modern ghost cities, not ancient ruins but frozen moments of recent life. Stores still stocked with empty shelves, schools with desks left behind, apartments with personal belongings still inside, too heavy or painful to take. The absence feels louder than any destruction. These places stand as reminders not just of the earthquake's power, but of its lasting consequences. The ground did not just shake buildings apart. It erased futures tied to specific places. Mass relocation reshapes entire regions. Host cities struggle to absorb displaced populations. Housing shortages worsen. Tensions rise. Identities shift as people become refugees within their own country. Communities fracture and reform elsewhere, carrying shared trauma with them. Meanwhile, the abandoned zones remain, cordoned off, monitored, remembered. Some are visited only by officials and researchers. Others are left entirely alone, decaying quietly. Over time, these ghost cities take on symbolic weight. They become warnings etched into the landscape, proof that not everything can or should be rebuilt. They challenge the belief that human presence is permanent, that progress always moves forward. Standing at the edge of one, it becomes clear that recovery is not about restoring the past. It is about accepting loss and redefining the future. When governments declare national emergencies and cities are left behind, the disaster enters its final phase, not resolution, but transformation. The earthquake becomes history, but its imprint remains visible in policy, geography, and memory. What survives is not the old world, but a reshaped one, carrying scars both seen and unseen. And in those quiet, empty streets, the silence speaks clearly. Some changes cannot be undone, only understood. Years after the earthquake, the world that once felt familiar has become a landscape of memory, loss, and painstaking reconstruction. Rebuilding is not a rapid process. It is measured in months, years, and sometimes decades. What many do not talk about is not the initial devastation itself, but the slow, grinding work that follows, the kind of work that wears down bodies and minds alike. Streets are repaved, but every crack, every scar, every uneven slab carries a history that cannot be erased. Buildings rise again, yet their walls hold echoes of the collapse, structural reinforcements serving as reminders of what nearly failed. Recovery is as much psychological as it is physical, a long negotiation between hope and the persistent reminder of vulnerability. Communities attempt to restore routines, but nothing fits perfectly anymore. Schools reopen, but many classrooms are smaller, missing teachers who never returned, and students who were lost. Neighborhoods reform, yet the population is shifted, families relocated, friends dispersed. Markets reopen, yet supply chains remain fragile, and prices fluctuate unpredictably. Shops that survived often sell only essentials. Luxury, leisure, and comfort are absent for years, replaced by practicality and scarcity. The rhythm of daily life becomes an exercise in adaptation. Small victories, like reconnecting electricity, clearing a main road, or delivering a shipment of food, become monumental, celebrated quietly, because life feels fragile even when stability returns. Physical reconstruction is only the first hurdle. Engineers and architects work tirelessly to ensure that new buildings will withstand future tremors. But this work takes time. Permits are slow, materials expensive, and skilled labor limited. Every project carries the weight of past trauma. No one wants to repeat mistakes. Rebuilt schools, hospitals, and homes are symbols of resilience, but they are also constant reminders that the old world no longer exists. Even after structures rise, there are gaps in infrastructure, roads that end abruptly, bridges still unsafe, communication lines partially restored. Each uncompleted project serves as a silent testament to the scale of the disaster and the limits of human effort. Economic recovery stretches even further. Jobs were lost overnight. Businesses that survived the quake struggled to reopen fully, often facing damaged supply chains, displaced workers, and new regulations imposed to mitigate future risk. Many residents find themselves unemployed for months or years, forced to rely on aid or informal economies. Poverty deepens in affected areas, creating stress and frustration that can erode social cohesion. For some, recovery is measured not in reconstruction, but in survival, finding the next meal, securing housing, or earning enough to cover medical needs. The disparity between those who can rebuild and those who cannot becomes painfully visible, and it lasts long after the rubble is cleared. The emotional toll is relentless. Survivors carry invisible scars that do not fade with time. Nightmares persist, triggered by tremors, news reports, or even sudden noises. Anxiety remains high, particularly in regions prone to aftershocks or where seismic instability is ongoing. Post-traumatic stress does not disappear when streets are repaved. It lingers in restless sleep, hypervigilance, and a constant awareness of fragility. Communities, even as they rebuild physically, struggle to rebuild trust. People who once relied on neighbors and networks find relationships altered or strained. Grief surfaces unpredictably, even years later, as anniversaries, weather events, or minor tremors reopen emotional wounds. Medical systems, though repaired, face long-term strain. Hospitals continue to see patients with injuries, chronic conditions worsened by delayed care, and mental health challenges directly linked to trauma. Psychologists and counselors are in high demand, but access is uneven. Rural and remote areas are often left without sufficient support. Even urban centers, despite resources, struggle to meet the demand. Recovery is not just a matter of rebuilding buildings. It is rebuilding the human capacity to live fully, to feel safe again, and to hope for a future without constant fear. Education, too, bears long shadows. Children who experienced the quake early in life carry developmental challenges, emotional trauma, and disrupted schooling. Teachers work tirelessly to bridge gaps, but learning loss is real and lasting. Extracurricular activities, once a source of joy and growth, are often sacrificed in the name of survival and stability. Adolescents may experience delayed social and emotional development, carrying anxiety and caution that persists into adulthood. In this way, the earthquake leaves generational impacts that last long after physical reconstruction is complete. Governments, NGOs, and international organizations play crucial roles, yet bureaucracy often slows progress. Aid reaches some areas quickly, bypassing others entirely. Rebuilding plans are sometimes altered or stalled due to corruption, funding shortfalls, or logistical challenges. Residents grow frustrated as promises fail to materialize, further taxing morale. Even when infrastructure projects are completed, maintenance is ongoing. Roads, bridges, water systems, and electricity grids require constant attention. Recovery is not a single achievement, but a continuous process that demands patience and vigilance. Communities attempt to commemorate, to process collective grief. Monuments, memorials, and annual remembrances become rituals of recognition. Yet for many, these acts cannot fully capture the personal, intimate losses. The homes destroyed, the family members gone, the careers and aspirations lost in a single moment. Photography, art, and storytelling emerge as means to process trauma, but each account reminds both narrator and audience of the scale of what was endured. Recovery includes memory, and memory carries its own weight. Infrastructure aside, the psychological landscape is scarred. Survivors often struggle to feel safe in the rebuilt world. Even in structurally sound buildings, fear remains. Tremors, real or imagined, trigger immediate responses. Families sleep near exits. People hesitate to enter tall buildings or bridges. The city, though repaired, remains psychologically altered. Daily routines require constant negotiation between the desire to live normally and the memory of the catastrophe that changed everything. Trust, both in structures and in society, is rebuilt incrementally, with setbacks along the way. Years into recovery, life resumes in visible ways, yet underlying tension persists. Streets bustle, schools function, businesses reopen. Yet beneath the surface, the trauma continues. Relationships, careers, and personal health carry lingering effects. Survivors often describe the sensation of living in a different world, one that feels familiar in appearance but foreign in essence. Recovery is not linear. It is a cycle of rebuilding, reassessing, and healing, punctuated by setbacks that remind everyone of what was lost. Ultimately, the long road to recovery is a journey few talk about because it is grueling, incremental, and emotionally exhausting. It is not defined by grand gestures, news headlines, or the completion of buildings. It is defined by the quiet persistence of survivors who navigate a world forever changed, who rise day after day despite lingering fear, who rebuild relationships, communities, and themselves alongside the fractured cityscape. Scars, both visible and invisible, remain. They shape behavior, choices, and identity for years to come. The earthquake does not simply end. It evolves into a slow, relentless challenge, a test of resilience, patience, and humanity itself. Those who endure learn that recovery is not about returning to what was. It is about learning to live fully in a world that has been irrevocably transformed. As we bring this broadcast to a close, take a moment to breathe and let the weight of what we've explored settle. The earth shakes, the seas rise, cities crumble, and lives are altered in an instant. But even in the darkest hours, the resilience of humanity quietly persists. We have listened to stories of loss, of fear, of uncertainty, but also of courage, endurance, and the stubborn will to keep moving forward. Survivors navigate rubble-strewn streets. Hospitals strain under impossible pressure. Families clutch one another in the shadow of uncertainty. And yet, day after day, people find ways to rebuild, to hope, to care for one another. The long road to recovery is not measured in headlines or photographs. It is measured in moments of quiet perseverance, neighbors sharing what little they have, strangers helping strangers, communities creating shelter, aid, and connection amidst the chaos. It is the small, almost invisible acts of humanity that weave together the fragile fabric of life after devastation. And while scars, both visible and unseen, will remain for years to come, they do not define the end. They are reminders of strength, survival, and the enduring human spirit. Tonight, as the lights flicker back on in some homes, and as others remain dark, remember that resilience is not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it lives in silence, in steady hands, in the courage to wake up tomorrow even when the ground beneath us feels uncertain. The world may change, cities may never look the same, and the future may seem fragile. But within each of us, there is the power to endure, to adapt, and to rise again. So as we sign off tonight, hold on to that spark. Let it remind you that even in the aftermath of the unimaginable, life continues, hope persists, and together we navigate the long, uncertain road ahead. From all of us here on this station, thank you for listening, for feeling, and for remembering that in the heart of every disaster, the human spirit remains unbroken.